Just as we expected, don't expect to see Michael Thomas and Marshon Lattimore back on the field for the New Orleans Saints Thursday against the Los Angeles Rams. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ross Jackson. I'm a credentialed media member covering your New Orleans Saints, the senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode, we're going to be breaking down what we liked and what we didn't like from the New Orleans Saints win over the New York Giants, including how the New York Giants bored me to death. We're going to be taking a look as well as how the New Orleans Saints did something that they haven't done so far all season, at least not in convincing fashion. And to kick us off, we're going to give you some injury updates on 4 key players for the New Orleans Saints after our conversation with Dennis Allen on Monday. I appreciate you for being an everydayer and for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free today at linkedin.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. So let's kick today's episode off with a look at injury updates for 4 New Orleans Saints. We'll start off with 2 primary guys, Michael Thomas and Marshon Lattimore. Don't expect to see either of them on the field on Thursday against the Los Angeles Rams. Now, this is akin to what we expected. Both cornerback Marshon Lattimore and wide receiver Michael Thomas, 2 star players for the New Orleans Saints, the top at their position for each of those guys. Although maybe you can make the argument about Michael Thomas and then the second-year receiver in Chris Olave, right? Who we'll also get a little bit of an update on here in just a moment. But it seemed to make sense with both of them having gone on injured reserve basically 4 weeks ago, just before the Thanksgiving season. They were required to miss 4 weeks. That was the bye week, the Atlanta Falcons game, so coming off of the bye week, and then the Atlanta Falcons game. Then you had, of course, Detroit, and then you had most recently, the weekend before last, Carolina, and then, of course, this week against New York. This was now the time to where they could start to open the practice window for these players. Remember, very rarely, and you can see this with Peyton Turner right now, do players just come right off of injured reserve and then onto the starting lineup or onto the active roster. Usually what they do is they open the practice window, which is a 21-day window in which players can, coming off of injured reserve, reacclimate, participate in practice, all of those things without counting against the active roster. And then after that 21-day period, or by the end of that 21-day period, the team must either add them to their active roster, which then usually comes with some corresponding move, having to cut somebody to make room or something like that, or they go back on injured reserve and end their season. So for the New Orleans Saints, we now see them go 4 weeks. And then the expectation, according to Dennis Allen, who we spoke to earlier on Monday via Zoom call, that the expectation is that they will not be at practice this week. They're not opening the practice window for them this week. Do we see that change, though, up against the game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? It could make a lot of sense, right? You know you're coming off of a short week. You know you're not going to get those guys out on the field on Thursday anyway. You've only got 2 days of practice effectively. The Saints on Monday got a day off in terms of players. They'll practice on Tuesday and Wednesday. Some of that will probably be light walkthroughs as well. And then come Thursday, they got to play a game. So it didn't seem like either of those players were going to make it onto the field on that short week anyway, with only 2 days of practice, about 2 days of practice, to say that more accurately. So then, not activating the practice window might raise some red flags. It was certainly my expectation that maybe they would open the practice window for them, but the red flags really shouldn't start to come out, honestly, until next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, before that Tampa Bay game in Tampa. So that's what I would be watching out for, is to see if maybe Michael Thomas and Marshon Lattimore at least return to practice at that point. Even if they don't actually play in Tampa, they would have the opportunity to return against Atlanta, or if the Saints make the playoffs, return after the regular season for those playoff games. In any case, that would be possible as long as they're activated and moved to the active roster within 21 days of that practice window opening. Now, on the other hand, two players that missed the game against the New York Giants, wide receiver, second-year stud wide receiver, Chris Olave out of Ohio State, and then, of course, longtime right tackle, starting right tackle for the Saints and Ryan Ramczyk. Both of those guys missed. Now, the guys that stepped up in their place, next man up, performed well. Rashid Shaheed looked good in a little bit of an expanded role. A.T. Perry made a couple of really big catches for them down the field. Lynn Bowden had one big drop, but outside of that, you saw him go out there and there was one where like he laid out over the middle of the field, caught it. You saw the tight ends get a little bit more involved. Alvin Kamara with the screen, catch and run, things like that. So you saw the Saints find other ways to supplement not only not having Chris Olave, but also not having Michael Thomas. Remember that compounds. Getting Rashid Shaheed back on the same timeline seemed to help out quite a bit. But I think there's a good chance that we see him on Thursday against the Rams. He'll practice. Dennis Allen told us this today that on Monday he expects Chris Olave to practice in some form or fashion. The Saints were more than willing, had he been kind of ready to go Sunday morning, to walk him into the Superdome, have him sort of go out there, test things out, and if he could do the things that he needed to do, they would have played him on a week of no practice. So there's no sense in thinking that they wouldn't play him off of a week of limited practices on Tuesday and Wednesday if he feels like he can go on Thursday and shows out pre-game that he can do the things that he needs to do. I assume something similar there will happen with Ryan Ramczyk. Ryan Ramczyk is a player that's going to come in and very likely, with Monday being kind of a day off already for everybody, probably practice on Tuesday. Remember, usually he has the first day of the week as a limited sort of rest situation, and then he starts up the second day. So Tuesday will be the second day of the practice week, technically, for Ryan Ramczyk and the New Orleans Saints. So we'll see if he's back out there. Landon Young, though, did perform well. They did give him a lot of help over on that right side, but they were able to get all of that done against the New York Giants, who do have a fairly good pass rush and a fairly good defensive line. Is it Aaron Donald? No. But they were able to kind of manage a little bit of what Kayvon Thibodeau, for instance, was able to do over on that opposite side. One more injury update for you as well. Lonnie Johnson Jr. Looked like it was a bad injury, went down with a knee injury, had to be helped off the field during the game against the New York Giants. I asked Dennis Allen about it on Monday. He said that it's going to be something that's going to take some time to heal, but they don't know how long it's going to take. But he did rule out anything that's like an ACL injury or something that was like a more significant season-ending type of a situation. The expectation, much like Michael Thomas, much like Marshon Lattimore, is that the expectation is, or the hope is, that they will play this season. Same thing goes for Lonnie Johnson Jr. I wouldn't expect to see him on Thursday, but we'll see if he's able to get back out there. Lonnie's important because they utilize him in sort of that dime package when they bring out 6 defensive backs and everything. He usually ends up being the safety far away from the line of scrimmage, while guys like Tyrann Mathieu and Jordan Howden end up kind of threatening at the defense, at the line of scrimmage and everything. So he ends up serving a big role there. If he's not able to go on Thursday, which is certainly the expectation at this point, guys like Jonathan Abram, as well as another veteran safety in Ugo Amadi, who is wild versatile, would also be able to fill into that role for sure. So those are your injury updates there. Don't expect to see Michael Thomas or Ryan Ramczyk or Lonnie Johnson Jr. on Thursday, though there is significant hope that they will be back during the regular season. Do expect to see at least Chris Olave, if not Chris Olave and Ryan Ramczyk, back at practice on Tuesday and Wednesday. We'll see if they end up playing on Thursday, but both of which would be a big boost for this New Orleans Saints offense that is starting to find its rhythm. And a New Orleans Saints offense that finally did something this season that it hasn't done all season this past weekend against the New York Giants. We're going to break that down as we go over what we did like from the Saints win against the Giants as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make the hiring process, which especially for small businesses can feel very daunting, right? A whole bunch of stuff to manage. What's the role that you're trying to fill? How do you find not only the person with the requisite experience, but also the right personality to fit your team? All of that. LinkedIn Jobs gives you the tools that you need to be able to simplify the hiring process and make sure that you're hiring the qualified candidate and the quality candidate that you're looking for. And with a pool of over 1 billion people on their network, billion, billion people on their network. It couldn't be easier, and especially with some of the great hiring tools that they give you, like screening questions and things like that, it just doesn't get any easier. It's why small businesses vote LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading candidates. Go and check them out today. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Big thank you to you, the everydayer, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out that Locked On Sports Today 24/7 sports stream. It is the first national sports media stream on 24/7 on YouTube. So go check it out today over at Locked On Sports Today. So as we get into our second episode here, which is going to be a full episode, I know usually I do kind of like truncated episodes for this, but since we had all those injury updates and stuff like that, I wanted to get you all that info. In addition to getting you what we liked against for the New Orleans Saints in their win against the New York Giants. And in this win, the Saints, and particularly their offensive side, did something that they have not done so far this season. The New Orleans Saints won this game, not at all contingent upon the mistakes made by the opposition. The New Orleans Saints won this game a lot more than the New York Giants lost this game. Now, the New York Giants did some things that I thought shot them in the foot. We're going to get to that when I go through what we don't like from this win. And I get to do that because I had to watch it. So I get to complain about the things that the Giants made me watch. I get to do that. You get to do that. We're going to do that together. But before we get to that, I want to highlight what the New Orleans Saints did that they haven't done all season. And it's that idea. They won without the other team losing for them. They didn't help themselves, the New York Giants. No doubt about that. Are the New York Giants world beaters? Absolutely not. Did they come in hot off of a 3-game win streak? Absolutely. Did they just recently beat a team in a comeback victory in a game or against a team that the Saints blew a lead to? Yes, the Green Bay Packers. That indeed did happen. So when we look at where you can kind of rank this New York Giants win, you have to rank it above all of the last place teams that New Orleans has beat. They're not 1-12 anymore because the Atlanta Falcons found a way to lose to the Carolina Panthers, even though the Carolina Panthers didn't score but 3 field goals in the game. They lost 9-7. That's embarrassing. That's their problem, though. But the Saints had 2 wins against that team, right? They ended up getting wins against teams like the Indianapolis Colts, a good team. That ended up working out. That was probably their best win of the season up until this win against the New York Giants. But then they beat teams like the New England Patriots, the Tennessee Titans, bottom feeders within their divisions, all of those things. And so this is a game that I think that you can look at and then you can say, okay, there were real things that you saw them do that built off of their victory, the 28-6 victory against the Carolina Panthers, that they got better at, that they built upon their pass rush, their ability to establish the run game, taking what was given to them by the defense in the passing game instead of forcing passes downfield. We've watched those downfield passes creep down in a way that's really productive for this New Orleans Saints offense, getting their playmakers in spaces where they should be. Alvin Kamara catching screen passes, Juwan Johnson catching touchdowns in the seam, Jimmy Graham being utilized in the red zone over the course of the past 3 games after being inactive inexplicably for the last 4. Those types of things. So we've seen the Saints do some good things here. But this on Sunday that I loved was that this was actually a game that the New Orleans Saints won, even though they didn't force a turnover. Now, they forced a couple of turnovers on downs. I'll give them that. But for the most part, this is a game in which the defense played better than the New York Giants offense, and the offense for the Saints played better than the New York Giants defense, and it was just that simple. And I credit the New Orleans Saints for that. Oftentimes, we've seen this team, in fact, I'll lay it out, 6 times. 6 of their 7 wins have come from the fact that they are 6-0 when scoring off of turnovers, right? Scoring off of a turnover from the opposition. So it was the opposition making a mistake, which the New Orleans Saints opportunistic defense was taking advantage of, credit where credit's due. But then that turned into bonus momentum. Sometimes that happened in, opponent territory, whatever that might be. And that ended up helping the New Orleans Saints be able to get into the end zone. That didn't happen in this game. Now, the Saints did win the field position battle. Their average starting field position was their own 30-yard line. They only started 2 drives, my apologies, behind their own 25-yard line, Meanwhile, the New York Giants average starting field position was their own 24, with I believe only 1 or 2 drives starting at better than their own 25. So those are the things that the Saints did well in this game that all worked. And the Saints simply won this game without the results being contingent upon the mistakes made by the opposition. To me, that's a big thing to where the Saints don't need to hang their hats and say, okay, we're done here. We're the perfect team all of a sudden, because that's far from true. That's far from true for any NFL team. But they do get to pat themselves in the back and build a little bit of confidence off of this victory. And that's really nice. The other thing that I'll mention here is the pass rush. I went back, and if you're part of the Locked On Saints Insider Group, which you can join, it's $4.99 a month, free for the first 14 days. Film studies, Q&As, stuff like that. If you want to try it out, text Who Dat to 504-285-7473. That's going to get you started with a 14-day free trial. We did a film study of all 7 sacks that the Saints had. And I think there are examples of the Saints winning by doing the thing that New York is just clueless about on the offensive line, which is stopping stunts and twists. But there's also just straight up wins. And some of my favorite straight up wins that happened here was Bryan Bresee just being stronger than the guy in front of him, outlasting, outfighting. Tano passing with interior pressure coming from the inside, rushing as a defensive tackle. Colin Saunders helping out in the stunt game. But outside of that, too, in terms of a straight up rush win, Zack Baun, man. Zack Baun's doing it, y'all. Like, there's a rep to where he was matched up with Tyree Phillips, who I'll remind you is 6'5" and 330 pounds, as compared to 6'3", 225 pounds for Zack Baun, where they actually locked up for a second. Now, did Zack Baun win the outside leverage? For sure. But they lock up, and then Zack Baun doesn't get tossed. He doesn't get thrown out of the club. He doesn't get out-muscled, anything like that. He wins that rep in a situation to where he has to fight. He has to use some strength, use some leverage. Now, I will say Tyree Phillips consistently up too high. Zack Baun, being shorter, was able to kind of utilize his sort of lower center of gravity to win some of that. But that's smart. You have to know how to do that. You can't just do it because you're shorter. I couldn't go out there as somebody that Tyree Phillips has not 100 pounds on, but 300 pounds on, because I might be 30 pounds if I'm lucky, and do that, right? Like, you have to know how to do that. It's still a technical thing that has to get done. Now, did Zack Baun finish that sack? No, but it did hold up Tommy DeVito for Bryan Bresee to finish that sack. Then that was at 8 minutes and 40 seconds left in the fourth quarter, with just over 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter. You saw Zack Baun realize that Tyree Phillips is up too high. And then what does he do? He gets in, gives a little stutter step, gets Tyree Phillips to flash his hands. He sees where the hands are. Zack Baun, instead of engaging this time, dips the inside shoulder, gets underneath, bends, and then gets to Tommy DeVito. Not able to finish the sack, but hey, it turned into, I believe that one was Tano Passanio's 3rd sack. Either that or it was Carl Granderson's, another Carl Granderson sack. So I loved what we saw from the pass rush. Now, they're going to get dinged a little bit, the pass rush, kind of publicly and in film study and in stuff like that. And understandably so. I completely get it, because New York is clueless of how to handle defensive linemen doing anything but running forward. If an offensive lineman takes a single step to the left, the offensive line for New York kind of gets distracted. Something shiny over here, and then boom, somebody's crossing their face. That's all there. So there is some of it that is that the New York Giants are terrible against those stunts and twists, and have remained terrible all season against those stunts and twists. But we have seen over and over again this New Orleans Saints team match up with teams that have previously struggled against those stunts and twists, and all of a sudden it doesn't work for the Saints, who were injured on the offensive line. All of a sudden the Saints can't get a pass rush. So there is something still positive to take from that. The straight up rush stuff is great. The Zack Baun straight up rush stuff is awesome. But even still, winning the stunts and twists, they deserve a little bit of credit for that too, and I like seeing it. Coming up next, I want to tell you how the Giants bored the ever-loving love out of me, and how I hope we never see it from the New Orleans Saints. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook and the official sports betting partner here on the Locked On Podcast Network. The New Orleans Saints, 4-point underdogs, traveling to Los Angeles to take on the Rams on Thursday night. makes a lot of sense too. Really, these two teams are pretty evenly matched, probably from a Vegas perspective, but then you lay an extra 3 points for the home field, quote unquote, home field advantage of the Los Angeles Rams. Going to be very interesting to see if West Coast Saints fans turn SoFi Stadium into what the Detroit Lions fans turned the Superdome into just a few weeks ago. We'll see how that all pans out. But listen, if you've never tried FanDuel before, now is absolutely the time to get in on it. Because if you head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon, you're going to get $150 in bonus bets by simply winning one $5 money line bet. That's all you got to do. Pick one team to beat the other team. Get it right. That's $150 if your team wins. So go and check them out today. FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with what we didn't like from the New Orleans Saints win. I've got one thing I didn't like from the Giants, one thing that I still didn't like from the Saints. Let's start off with the thing I didn't like from the Giants. The thing I didn't like about the Giants is that they bored me to death in this game, especially doing the film study, going back, doing the rewatch. I usually watch every game about 6 times. I watch it live, of course, when I'm there. I rewatch it that night. I rewatch it again that morning because I have to do some like TV stuff and stuff like that. So I want to be ready for all that. And then I end up watching it a couple of times, at least 3 more times on film, right? And so the thing about that comes with that is that oftentimes this season, the Saints have kind of bored me. But this time, the Giants were a snooze fest. And when I say that they were a snooze fest, let me tell you how. The reason why they bored me to death the way that they did is because of the fact that like all the things that got them to their 3-game win streak, and this is a lesson to be learned by the New Orleans Saints, by the way. So this isn't just about the Giants. This is relevant to the Saints too. The things that got them to their 3-game win streak, they didn't do against the New Orleans Saints. I don't know if they just got really, really comfortable in their passing game because Darren Waller got back, but that was the wrong choice. Look, very little motion. Very little usage of Wan'Dale Robinson, no jet sweeps, no reverses, things like that where they try to get him running. They tried the one screen to him. That got blown up. And outside of that, they didn't really try to do anything else with him. The RPO game, gone. Maybe one of those in this game against the Saints. The usage of Saquon Barkley, a lot of running up the middle, not so much running around the edge. Maybe it's because the Saints were a really good perimeter run defense team. They're a much better perimeter run defense team than they are an interior or have been an interior run defense team over the course of the season so far. So maybe the Giants wanted to exploit that as best as they could. Only one keeper really run for Tommy DeVito. What are we doing here? Like, that was a big thing for me, is that the Giants just could not kind of get out of their own way and could not execute the offense that they were trying to execute. Now, some of that, and you listen to Tommy DeVito, you listen to Brian Dable, they all credit the Saints defense for kind of forcing that. And I can see some of that because I saw some situations where the Saints came out, they made some adjustments, and then the Giants made some adjustments. Maybe the Giants were adjusting away from some of the things that they were ready to do because the Saints adjusted for what they were about to do. And so the chess match got underway. But if you have an identity, stick to the identity. And for me, that is the thing that is the most sort of translatable lesson for the New Orleans Saints after watching how badly the Giants played and executed over on offense. Find an identity, define that identity, run with that identity, stick with what works. And we've seen the Saints struggle with this in the past. Taysom Hill goes out, has a great game. The Saints go away from Taysom Hill. He doesn't get but 1 or 2 carries for the next game or 2, right? Things like that. Even in this game, the Saints, Taysom Hill, 1 carry. He had the 1 pass attempt that would have been huge for Lynn Bowden, but unfortunately, just bad ball placement on that one. A lot of pressure, all these other things. I don't really care about an excuse for it. Bad pass, didn't work out, plays over, didn't cost him anything. Could have been a nice play, though. That's about it. So, in looking at it, I understand why Taysom Hill didn't have a big role in this game. He was coming off of injury, all these other things. They were running effectively with Jamal Williams. They were running effectively enough with Jamal Williams. They were running effectively with Alvin Kamara. They got the passing game going, right? They were able to dice up this defense and the passing game quite a bit. I think that those things actually worked out well for New Orleans. So then, and by the way, we saw those trips formations with Juwan Johnson on the backside, by the way. We saw those things like we broke down in, here it was our Wednesday or our Friday episode. But the Saints have to make sure now as they're building an identity. And I asked Alvin Kamara about this after the game on Sunday night. Was this an identity building game or an identity confirming game? Because, look, Alvin was really overt, really honest at the beginning of the season or earlier in the season that he felt that the Saints didn't have an identity. So now, how's it coming down? Now, but I asked him to define it, and he said he couldn't define it yet because it's still being built, which is understandable. But once that thing gets defined, once they have found that identity, they have to define it, and then they need to stick with it and run with it. Are they going to be able to do that moving forward all throughout? I don't know. Do they have time to really get that done? I don't know, but the sooner, the better for sure. What I didn't like on the New Orleans Saints side, and I'm going to take away one of these. So there were 6 penalties in this game. I'm going to take away the Alontae Taylor penalty because it was just an awful penalty. Dennis Allen says he doesn't agree with the call. The league hasn't said anything about it. And honestly, it's for the best. Like, one of my least favorite things that the NFL does is that they'll miss a call and then they'll come back and they'll say, I'm sorry, I missed a call, and then nothing happens. Like, it goes nowhere. It's just somebody going, oh, gee, I'm so sorry, and then nothing ever happens. So, like, don't do that, right? Outside of that penalty, there were a couple times where the Saints kind of shot themselves in the foot. They had a couple of those pre-snap penalties that maybe got them in a little bit of trouble. Had to take a couple of timeouts and stuff like that. So a little bit of clock management, game management stuff, still an issue that popped up. I'm not going to sit here and, like, beat a drum here and say that the Saints are bad when they come off of what was probably their best win of the season. But there's still things that, like, this team wants to improve upon, and these sort of procedural things are a big part of that. The block punt, you live with that one. You know what? Or not the block punt, sorry. The running into the kicker one, you kind of live with that one, right? Because, like, JT Gray was right there on that punt. And if he makes contact with the football, then it's not a penalty, but just barely didn't make contact with the football. So I'm not super worried about that one. But, some of this procedural stuff is still kind of stressing me out a little bit, right? Like, those are still some of the things that you look at and you go, okay, why isn't this still cleaned up here? And then the other thing is that, like, this New Orleans Saints team, for all of the great start that they had over on the defensive side, still a slow start on the offensive side. No Alvin Kamara on the field in the first drive. They go 3 and out early on. And I asked Dennis Allen about, was there a specific reason why they didn't go? Was there something that maybe they saw scouting wise or film study wise, in preparation for this game about how the Giants defend the run? And they thought, okay, well, maybe Jamal would be a better one to do that. Remember those first scripted plays, which Saints have just been awful at all season, but those on the offensive side, those first scripted plays, you're often doing something that's a little bit different than what you put on tape before and everything. But the Saints just can't seem to get that right. So another 3 and out in the opening drive, still no opening drive touchdown. The Saints got their second opening drive touchdown last year in week 15. It was week 7 and week 15. Then they got, I think 4 in the last 5 games, maybe it was 3 in the last 5 games, something like that. So good time to find it would be in LA for sure, especially on the road and all that other stuff. But still just an inability to get this offense started off the bat. And that they need that they need a little bit of a jolt, right? They're a little bit too reliant on needing to be energized. And thankfully, Demario Davis was out there flying like crazy. Dennis Allen said that he challenged Juwan Johnson in the post-game speech. He said on Monday during his Zoom presser with us that he challenged some of the veterans. Demario Davis obviously took that to heart. So I'll be interested to see what happens going up against the Rams, but I think you got to string one together. Like, you got to get an opening drive touchdown, get a fast start, all those other things. It doesn't mean that you're going to win the game, okay? The opening drive touchdown does not mean that you win the game, but certainly getting started off on the right foot and getting a fast start on the road in Los Angeles would be huge for this New Orleans Saints team, especially with their inability to have done that so far. So a couple little things that I didn't like from this game by the New Orleans Saints. Coming up tomorrow, since it's such a short week, we're going to immediately start to turn our attention to the Los Angeles Rams. What is it that they do on the offensive side, and how do the New Orleans Saints limit it? And then the big-time matchups that will come down to the passing game. Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, as well as, of course, Cooper Kupp going up against the New Orleans Saints defense and the corners led by, of course, Paulson Adebo and Isaac Yiadom over on the outside. How do the Saints counter it? What do they need to be ready for? We're going to start breaking all of that down on Tuesday. Appreciate you, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, go and check out Locked On Pels. They got a big win on Sunday as well. Jake's breaking it all down. And, of course, you can go and check out Caroline Fitton over at Locked On LSU, still celebrating some of those Heisman feelings. Appreciate you as always for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.